Hello and welcome to our webinar. Today we're going to go over the 8 electrical estimating mistakes that are costing you big time. My name is Derek Pillaquadri and I am the president of Vision Infosoft, and Brian Hofffelder joins me today. Brian is Vision's training and software development expert and is leading today's webinar.
Thanks, Derek. Let's see here. So the first mistake, and this is to me the big one, but just let me mention before we start here, all of these 8 mistakes here are kind of no-brainers. I'm sure you've heard them all before. What we're attempting to do here today is to just kind of bring them back to your attention, and not only to remind you about these mistakes so that you can avoid them, but show you some ways to avoid them, either with our software or with other tips that will help you avoid making these mistakes. Now, to me, this is the big number one mistake. I mentioned it in every class I do, that where we're doing a takeoff for estimating, is that leaving something out is the biggest mistake you can make. If you're short on your measurement, or you're long on your measurement, or you miss a couple of receptacles or a couple of fixtures, that's not as tragic as actually leaving out the fixtures or leaving out a feeder. But anything that you don't count is obviously not in your bid. It's just money out of your pocket, because eventually you'll have to provide that, whatever it is you left out of the takeoff. So how do you solve that? Really the simplest thing, and it's again, it's such a basic thing, you really need to mark everything off the drawings as you take it off. You can see a little insert here of a plan that's been marked off electronically. I'll show you another one real quick. This is using PlanSwift, which is what we integrate with EBM. And you can see this is a little takeoff I did a couple weeks ago and marked everything off from the drawings, and it's really clear what's taken off. There's a legend over here on the left that shows you what has been, what the items are that were taken off. Oops, I somehow skipped a slide there. Let me go back up. There we go. The other thing is entering your quotes. I've seen this done, more times than I want to admit to, but it's not that hard to leave out a quote. Now, EBM does remind you to put a quote in. If you take off lighting, if you take off gear, anything else that needs a quote, it prompts you when you're on the final summary to put the quote in. So it's pretty hard to do that, but it's such an important thing. If you leave out your quote, you're gonna get in trouble with your bid, obviously. So that's the big number one thing, is leaving things out, either not taking them off the drawings or not plugging in the quotes at the end. The other thing I recommend is having a checklist of your major systems, and just take a little time at the end and go through that checklist. Make sure you've picked up the fixtures. Make sure you've taken off the gear. Make sure you've taken off the feeders. Again, these are all parts of the system. You want to make sure that you haven't left one of these out, these major parts of the job. So just take a few minutes and walk through. Did we pick up all the gear? Did we pick up all the mechanical? Did we do the site work? Just part of a way of being methodical about making sure you don't leave something out. Again, it's pretty obvious, but if you leave out some feeders, or maybe even leave off one feeder, it can cost you big time on a bid. Okay, mistake number 2. We just talked about this indirectly, forgetting to check commodity prices. We know that prices and materials have been crazy over this last 6, 9, 12 months or so, but you've got to take some time and check your commodity prices. Now, EBM can help you with that. Let me show you one of the reports here. Oops. There we go. In the material, under the reports and material list, let's try to do a price update. That's appropriate. The material list here. I have to go back and open the job. So what I've done here is I've selected the categories of material, which are mainly commodities: branch wire, feeder wire, branch raceway, feeder raceway, underground feeder raceway. So these are kind of the big commodity items. And there's a report here, and this is all under the material list. I'm going to do the spreadsheet first. Now in the spreadsheet, you can unselect items For example, if you don't want the telephone pull box included on this because you've already got a quote on it, or a better example might be the backhoe, you can just eliminate that from the report. And then when you print this report, it'll look like this. So you can send this off to your suppliers. You can save it, print it as a PDF file, and then send it as an attachment to your suppliers that you want to get quotes from. So it's a kind of a quick way of isolating the commodity items. Let me flip back here. So that's the material list report in EBM. Now, another report that kind of helps you with that, I'm going to come back to this one later, the item cost report, because it does help you identify the commodity items, but it also does something else I want to show you later. So both of these reports in EBM will help you with the commodities, give you a report to send off to your suppliers, and help you identify the commodities. Okay, so mistake number 3. Not getting price guarantees. Now, this used to be kind of an easy thing to do. You could, relatively easily get a supplier to guarantee prices for 30 days on a wire quote or on a conduit quote, or certainly on gear or lighting. That's not a given these days. I mean, I've heard many times that the suppliers will say your price is good today, period, and that's it. But when you're bidding a large job, I think it's reasonable to request a quote, a guaranteed price for at least a certain number of days. And then when you bid the job, if your guarantees on prices are only a week, that's the best you can do to whoever you're bidding it to. So do what you can to get price guarantees. They're much harder to get today than they were this time a year ago or so, but you can still make the effort. And I think suppliers, even if they have to build in a little bit of cushion or maybe a fair amount of cushion, they're open to giving you price guarantees, because they just go back to their suppliers, the manufacturers, and work with them. Mistake number 4, not getting good coverage on quotes and subcontracts. Again, I think sometimes if you're in a hurry, maybe you don't get quotes from enough suppliers. Now what's enough? I don't think it's a good idea to get quotes on a half a dozen or a dozen suppliers on the lighting package or the gear package, but I think at least 3, maybe 4 quotes is reasonable. Your vendors expect that. They don't want to know that you're shopping around with a dozen different suppliers, though, because then they're wasting their time. Now, the same thing on subcontracts. If you're subbing out the fire alarm, if you're subbing out some low voltage or something like that, that's probably a little harder to get coverage on, but again, you need to get it, because you won't know if your pricing is good. And if your fire alarm is 25% of your bid and you haven't gotten a competitive price, it's could very well lose the bid for you. So make sure you're getting good coverage, make sure that your suppliers and your subcontractors are giving you good pricing. So not getting quotes on big ticket items, again, a lot of the time those are the commodities. So I wanted to show you the report in EBM that helps you identify the big ticket items as well as the commodities. So it's this one over here on the left called the item cost report. And you can tell it to sort by price. And then what it's going to do, it's going to give you the items that have the biggest dollar amount. You can see where I'm pointing my mouse here. Maybe I'll just even draw a little. So what it's done is it's sorted the items that have the biggest total dollar amount up to the top of the report. So these are the items you want to get some comparison pricing on. Again, a lot of these are commodities, but there's a kind of an oddball one up here, a Durablock, one of those rubber blocks that have the Unistrut built in. And on this particular job, it was the second highest dollar amount outside of the lighting and the gear. So that's an item you really want to check some pricing on, because it could make or break your bid. Again, in EBM, this is called the item cost report. Mistake number 6, not qualifying your bids properly, accurately, that kind of thing. When you do a proposal or send a scope letter to whoever you're bidding to, usually a general contractor, maybe an owner, it's really important to spend some time on qualifying your bid. And first of all, I would send that scope letter, that qualification letter, to whoever you're bidding to, enough ahead of time that they have a chance to review it. You don't want to wait to the last minute to tell your customer, here's all my exclusions, here's all my scope of work, because they won't have time to review it and compare your bid apples and apples. So, and again, in EBM, we have some templates, some form letters built into the system. If you go to job totals on EBM, here's that reminder that I didn't put my concrete quote in yet. There's a button down here called form letters. The one I would recommend taking a look at is the one called Proposal 3. So this is a template. So you can see it's pulling in information from the job. It's got the customer up here on the left. It's got the name of the job, the bid date, the proposal number. Now I haven't filled in the drawing numbers yet, and that's a really important part of the proposal, is to identify each page that you're bidding, E101, E102, E103, and the dates on each of those pages. If the specifications are in a separate document, you should list that here, and then any addendums. Those first three things are really the most important, because if you are the apparent winning bid, we know for sure that, especially on a larger job, the work might not start for months, and by the time they actually get around to starting the job, we know it's very likely they may have issued some new drawings, and now we've got to go back and compare what we bid to what the latest drawings are, and talk about adjusting prices and things like that. But if you haven't specified exactly what pages you bid, that's going to be a problem or a challenge. Now down here, I've got a list of exclusions. Again, this is just a list to start with. You need to go through each of these. You may have some on that you want to add to the list in your master template, but at this point, I would go through and start identifying things if I need to delete some of these exclusions, or if I need to add exclusions. You just need to take some time and go through this line by line. Again, this proposal is a good starting point because it covers a lot of territory. The other conditions down here, again, are things you need to look at. And here's one idea where you can put your price guarantee. How many days are you guaranteeing that bid for? If it's 7 days, it's 7 days. That's all you can do. That's all you can do. But things like here, where you're telling the customer that your quote is based on using MC cable, those are important things to qualify in your bid. I see too many times people just say plan is per my bid is per plans and specs. I think that's kind of a too easy of an out. I think your customer needs to know a little more than that when they're looking at several proposals and a relatively complex bid. They need to know exactly what you've got included, what you've got excluded, drawings and all that. So this is a real important part of the bid that I think you need to spend some time on. Try to get it out, like I said, at least enough ahead of time that they can review it. Number 7. Again, I've seen this happen too often, where you'll spend a lot of time preparing a bid, and then you either don't request the results or you're not getting the results on the other bidders. I think that whoever you're bidding it to has an obligation to you to tell you where you stood in the bid. If you were 2nd out of 5, or if you were 10 out of 10, you need to know that. And I think they even should tell you what the low bid was. If you're not the low bidder, you need to know that for future reference. If you're going to continue bidding with that customer or continue bidding that kind of work, you need to know if your prices are competitive. Some general contractors, some owners aren't real easy to get that information from, but I think if you can't get it, then that's a good clue that maybe you don't want to keep spinning your wheels with a particular customer, because I think they owe that to you to give you the results. And finally, the last mistake here, markup percentage. I see this happen a lot too, where an estimator doesn't adjust the markup percentage to account for when some of the materials are owner furnished. Like if the lighting package is furnished by the owner, or the gear is furnished by the owner, you need to adjust your markup, because that's markup that you're not getting on the job, even though you're doing the same amount of work. Maybe it's even more difficult because you can't control it. If the owner's providing the lighting and you're not controlling the purchasing and that aspect of it, you're actually even a little more of a disadvantage. Now, there's two ways to do it. Let me just go back to EBM and show you a couple of ways to take that into account. So on the job totals here, let me just change this real quick. I want to put all the job back in here. And okay. So this job had quoted items for fixtures, gear, lighting control, and concrete. So if any of these quotes were zero because they were owner furnished, that's going to drastically impact the overhead and profit which I apply. So two ways to kind of account for that. One, you could put in a guess or an estimate of what you think the lighting and the other quoted materials are that are owner furnished. And then when you put your normal overhead on, you can see what that turns out to in dollars. So if I put in $100,000 worth of quoted material, let's just do that real quick so you can get a picture of it. So I'm just going to lump it all under lighting for now. So if the lighting was normally, or if the lighting is furnished by the owner, you're estimating it's $100,000, and you were going to put 10% overhead, then 10% of 100,000 would, plus the sales tax, also you'd include that. So that would be about $115,000 to $116,000. So 10% of that would be $16,000 that you're not marking up. So on the overhead down here, you could actually put it in as a lump sum up here, down at the bottom. You could put in $16,000. So you could actually plug a dollar amount in based on what you think the quoted materials would be. Now here's a different way to do that. I really like this better. Overhead specifically is really based on your overhead markup should be based on the your labor, because that's really what drives it. If you've got 10 employees or if you've got 50 employees, your overhead really is a factor of managing your manpower. So what I've seen a number of companies do is they figure out how much it costs to recover their overhead based on the number of hours that they've got that they're paying their employees in the field. So just a real simple example. Let's say that you've got 10 employees and they work an average of almost 200 hours a month. That means you've got 2,000 hours of payroll every month. 2,000 at 20. Did I do that right? I always have to go back to my calculator. We've got 10 employees and they're working 200 hours a month. Whoops. Sorry about that. So that's 2,000 hours of payroll a month. Let's say your overhead is $20,000. That means it takes $10 an hour just to recover the overhead. And that takes the whole material part of it out of the equation. And again, I've seen companies that they watch that number, almost religiously. Every month they go back and look at what was our overhead per hour in the field. And it's real easy to put it into EBM if you know what that number was. Now, typically, I would see a number probably between 15 and 20 here. I would just use an example where the math was easy. But what you do is you come up here where it says by category, and you do per labor hour. And I'm just going to bump it up to 15 just to do that. So you add $15 an hour to your bid just to recover your overhead. And that compares to putting almost 13% if I had done it the old-fashioned way, I guess, using a percentage on overhead. So that's a good little calculation to do, especially when you get into jobs where there's a large portion of it owner furnished. Take some time and figure out what it really costs you to recover your overhead based on your number of hours in the field. Okay.
I think that covers it. Thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for joining us.